No movie is perfect, and no movie is free of mistakes either.
Who among us doesn't love spotting a totally ridiculous mistake in a movie? Filmmaking is so damn hard that it's frankly impressive that there aren't more mistakes in most films.
Because the sheer scale of any Hollywood production makes it impossible for a film to release without minor issues relating to continuity and so on.
Yet every so often a mistake will emerge that, for one reason or another, transitions into canon. And with that in mind, I'm Josh.
I'm Jem
from Whatculture.com, and these are movie mistakes that became canon.
Crowd goes mild in A Knight's Tale. Early on in A Knight's Tale, after William, played by Heath Ledger, wins his first battle under the guise of Knight Sir Ulrich, Geoffrey Chaucer raises his hand in victory and sings his praises, all while the assembled masses don't react, at all. Given that the crowd were hooting and hollering through the fight moments ago, this really doesn't make sense that they'd suddenly show no emotion whatsoever for the winner. And that's because this is a cleverly concealed mistake. A Knight's Tale was shot entirely in Prague in the Czech Republic, and so most of the extras were Czech locals without much grasp of English. And so when Paul Bettany was speaking his lines, most of the extras had no idea what he was saying, hence their utter lack of a reaction. It was only when Mark Addy, who played their pal Roland, started cheering loudly out of nowhere that the crowd joined in with him. Impressively, it flows totally organically in the final scene, proving how a mixture of clever editing and actors thinking on their feet can paper over a surefire gaffe.
You don't need me to tell you that it's a crazy, unpredictable world out there, and for movies that means mergers, acquisitions, licensing weirdness, and a whole bunch of other things that can stop you from watching the stuff you want to watch, and when. You'll be there scrolling, looking for, I don't know, the 1987 horror vampire classic Near Dark, only to find that it's nowhere to be found. What's with that? Luckily, our good pal Norton VPN, who I'm still calling Ed Norton VPN for full, much to the chagrin of my employers, is here to help us movie lovers out by letting us watch what we want, when we want. Scan the QR code on screen or use the link in the description and you can get 54% off your first year's subscription, working out as little as $4.17 per month, or £2.50 a month if you're in the UK like yours truly. Again, that's less than $5 a month to watch the stuff you love and look after your privacy while you do it. And hey, if you decide you don't want to keep going, Norton also has a 60-day money-back guarantee too, which is just proper lovely it is. A big thank you to Norton for sponsoring this video. You are, and always have been, my favorite Norton.
Rocky's oversized robe. Rocky. You'd be forgiven for letting out a little chuckle when you first see Rocky Balboa in his distinctive red boxing robe at the end of Rocky, ahead of his clash with heavyweight boxing world champion Apollo Creed. The robe's clearly way too big for star Sylvester Stallone and gives the impression of someone basically playing dress up in their dad's gear. And as it turns out, this was a legitimate error on the part of the film's costume department, with an oversized robe accidentally being delivered to set. Without any backup costume or any means to get it altered before shooting, Stallone made the executive decision to work the wardrobe malfunction into the plot, resulting in a cute little moment when Rocky asks Adrian, "You don't think this robe looks too baggy, you know?" Ultimately though, it only enhances Rocky's status as the underestimated underdog. I mean, if this guy doesn't even have a robe that fits him, how could he possibly go the distance against Apollo Creed? Sometimes the happiest accidents end up creating the most organic movie moments.
Jack's slip of the tongue in Titanic. A small but memorable mistake now in James Cameron's Titanic. During the iconic scene where Jack, played by DiCaprio, draws a nude Rose, played by Kate Winslet, Jack trips over his words upon glimpsing a disrobed Rose for the first time. He directs Rose to lay on the bed before hastily correcting himself to the couch. And while this seems perfectly on brand for a nervously excited Jack, it wasn't actually part of Cameron's original script. In the script, he plainly tells Rose to get on the couch, but during filming, a possibly flustered for real DiCaprio flopped the line before quickly correcting himself. Yet even a filmmaker as famously perfectionist as Cameron felt this goof was a perfectly natural addition to the scene, further highlighting Jack's nervousness and the overarching sexual tension of the scene, so he kept it in. Jack being thrown slightly off axis by Rose in the bath definitely feels better suited to the story than him simply being unfazed by it, even with all those French girls he sketched in the past.
Simon Skinner breaks the fourth wall Hot Fuzz. It's simply a matter of practicality that filmmakers can't catch every single mistake during shooting. And in the case of Hot Fuzz, director Edgar Wright didn't notice that the great Timothy Dalton briefly eyeballed the camera during one scene. When Dalton's smug villain Simon Skinner proposes a toast to the newly dead Martin and Eve, for a few fractions of a second, his eyes actually dart into the sightline of the camera lens, ensuring that he locks fleeting eyes with the audience. On the film's DVD commentary, Wright pointed this out and added that he originally considered using visual effects to correct Dalton's gaze, but ultimately decided that it would be funnier to turn it into a meta moment instead. And so, Wright had his sound team add the sound of a cash register clinking in the background to draw greater attention to it. And considering that Skinner is basically outing himself as a villain throughout the entire scene, it is pretty hilarious, if initially unintended, that he basically ends up winking at the audience for a tiny sliver of screen time.
Cross's pronunciation of Gittes in Chinatown. Throughout Roman Polanski's noir classic Chinatown, the villainous tyrant Noah Cross pronounces protagonist Jake Gittes, played by Jack Nicholson's surname incorrectly, basically ignoring the letter E, verbalizing it as Gits instead of Gittes. You probably assumed this was an intentional flourish in the film's script, but not quite. During shooting, John Huston struggled to pronounce the name correctly, but because Polanski felt that it perfectly suited Cross's arrogant slimeball character to consistently get the private investigator's name wrong, it was worked into the fabric of the movie itself. Polanski added a brief beat where Gittes tries to correct Cross's pronunciation during their first meeting, and it doesn't stick, only further underlying that this wealthy industrialist and crime lord basically sees himself above such fanciful nonsense as remembering the names of the people he's working with.
The anachronistic period detail, The Village. M. Night Shyamalan's wildly divisive The Village was dinged for many things upon release, and for anyone paying attention while they were watching it the first time, they might have had a few criticisms about the production and costume design. See, while viewing it without any prior knowledge of its inevitable plot twist, you might be a bit mystified by the noticeably contemporary buildings built from materials only used since the 1950s, despite the film itself allegedly being set in a 19th century village. Furthermore, many items of clothing worn throughout by the commune's characters shouldn't have existed until around 1970, and during the first hour of the movie, you'd be forgiven for just thinking that Shyamalan simply got lazy where the finer details were concerned. Yet, that was all proven hilariously, if bafflingly wrong, in the third act, when we learn that the village itself actually exists within the present day, providing a plausible reason for the period inaccurate buildings and clothes.
The idling train in 310 to Yuma. It goes without saying that it's incredibly easy for things to go wrong when you're a big budget film utilizing props as complex as old locomotives, as director James Mangold found out firsthand when shooting his brilliant remake of classic western 310 to Yuma. In the movie's climax, the titular train pulls into town and a shootout ensues featuring most of the principal characters, all while the aforementioned vehicle continues to idly chug in the background. But this was not the original plan. On the DVD commentary, Mangold confirmed that the weather was extremely cold while shooting the sequence, which presented a serious risk of the train's engine freezing up and refusing to start up again if they turned it off. And so, Mangold had to keep the train running on the spot for the entirety of the shooting just to keep it warm. And rather than digitally erase the steam at great cost in post-production, Mangold instead leaned into it, having his sound design team add in a hypnotic, heartbeat-like chugging sound of the train idling in the background as underscores the entire set piece. Given that the film went on to receive a Best Sound Mixing Oscar nomination, it was clearly the right choice. Von Trapp calls Maria Captain in The Sound of Music. Who can forget the scene from The Sound of Music where Captain Von Trapp, played by Christopher Plummer, gets into a heated argument with Maria, played by Julie Andrews, as she encourages him to pay more attention to his children. Von Trapp tries to shut the argument down, but when Maria insists she isn't finished, he retorts with, "Oh yes you are, Captain," before rolling his eyes and correcting himself with Fraulein. It obviously does not make much sense for Von Trapp to call Maria Captain, and as it turns out, this was a genuine flub on Christopher Plummer's part. And yet, because director Robert Wise felt that it fit the scene perfectly, and Plummer was smart enough not to break character, he used it in the final film regardless. Ultimately, this mistake only makes Von Trapp look more bothered by the truth bombs Maria just dropped on him, so it's a perfect, if unintended, accompaniment to the scene. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're there, drop us a like, share, and subscribe too.
Lando mispronounces Han's name, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. For literally more than 40 years at this point, Star Wars fans have wondered why Lando Calrissian just can't seem to pronounce his uneasy pal Han Solo's name correctly, which, by the way, I've since learned I've also been doing my entire life. See, in The Empire Strikes Back, Lando pronounces Han as if to rhyme with can, no matter that Han himself pronounces it to rhyme with none, essentially. Oh, not in my accent. Now, many at the time simply pawned it off as actor Billy D. Williams, offering up his own eccentric interpretation of the name. And because Empire was directed by Irvin Kershner rather than George Lucas, there perhaps wasn't the same impetus to correct it. But 4 decades on, fans finally had the pronunciation error fully canonized in Solo: A Star Wars Story. See, in this prequel, Han and Lando meet for the first time during a game of sabacc, where Lando mocks Han's incorrect pronunciation of the name. But moments later, Lando then gets Han's name wrong himself, which of course goes commented on. It's a cute little moment that demonstrates the origin of Lando's weird pronunciation and his ongoing refusal to say it right, which again, I can totally vibe with.
The insane final shot in The Last Temptation of Christ. Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ near literally canonized a technical mistake which occurred when shooting the biblical drama's final scene, where Jesus, played by William Dafoe, dies on the cross. The final shot has some peculiar visual artifacts, with the last glimpse of a dead Jesus being accompanied by a variety of bright colours which pollute the image. It'd be reasonable to assume that this was 100% intentional, coming from a director as exacting as Scorsese, but that wasn't nearly the case. As Scorsese himself confirmed in a 2019 interview, in reality the footage was accidentally compromised by an assistant cameraman who inadvertently opened the film magazine, in turn exposing the negative to daylight and damaging it. With no time to reshoot, Scorsese simply moved on, but when it came to editing, he decided to keep the edge fog. As the master filmmaker put it himself, the edge fog became the resurrection. Mein Führer, I can walk. Dr. Strangelove. Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove unforgettably concludes with the world being nuked into oblivion, but not before the title character suddenly stands up from his wheelchair and declares, Mein Führer, I can walk. It's well documented that Peter Sellers was an unpredictable presence on the movie's set, often going off script in wildly unexpected ways, with Kubrick claiming that even Sellers himself didn't know what he was gonna do for each take. And so, while we know that it wasn't scripted for Dr. Strangelove to suddenly stand up, legend states that Sellers didn't consciously mean to stand up at all, but simply got so caught up in the frenzy of performance that he rose to his feet. But ever the quick-thinking actor, Sellers covered his hide with that hilariously improvised final quip, which went on to become one of the best remembered moments from the entire film. Rocco finishes his joke while getting punched in the Boondock Saints. Sometimes there are more important things than a scene making complete sense, as Troy Duffy confirmed with his cult classic The Boondock Saints. Early on in the film, jokester David Della Rocco, played by actor of the same name, gets into a bar fight with members of the Russian mob after making a very naughty comment about one of their mothers, which ends with the phrase, her face looked like an egg. This prompts said Russian to punch Rocco in the face, yet if you pay attention to the exchange, Rocco is actually punched before he can finish rattling off the one-liner, and yet we hear the rest of the line regardless, as though he wasn't punched at all. Clearly, this is an awkward patch of editing, with Duffy struggling to have Rocco complete the line before being punched in the face, so he just shoved it in there regardless, even though it doesn't really make much sense. After all, there's basically no way for a person to keep telling a joke in a perfectly composed manner while getting socked in the jaw. But for many fans, this bizarre mistake nevertheless feels perfectly in step with the movie's spirit, and more specifically, Rocco's status as a tireless wisecracker. Considering his nickname is literally the funny man, if anyone's gonna be able to keep a gag going while being lapped in the face, it's definitely him. We'll let it slide. Rocky's trunks are the wrong colour in Rocky. In our previous article on the subject, we discussed how the original Rocky made the titular boxers, played by Sylvester Stallone, accidentally oversized wardrobe part of the plot, allowing it to further underline his status as a rough around the edges underdog. But that wasn't the only mistake which enhanced Rocky's scrappiness. Due to a miscommunication between the costume department and production designers, the banner of Rocky hanging in the arena of his big fight with Apollo Creed depicted him in the wrong coloured trunks. In In the final fight, he wears white trunks with a red trim, but in the banner the colours are flipped. According to the director, the artist who painted the banner was given a reference image of Stallone to work from where he was wearing the wrong trunks, and because the production had no money to have it repainted, they simply made it a small part of the story. Prior to the fight, Rocky points out the discrepancy to the fight promoter, who dismissively retorts, "Doesn't really matter though, does it?" It's a brilliant exchange which further emphasises the fact that Rocky is basically a total afterthought compared to Apollo. And Luca Brasi is nervous in The Godfather. The script for The Godfather did not make any mention of Don Corleone, played by Marlon Brando's enforcer Luca Brasi, played by Lenny Montana, being a nervous guy, but because Brasi ended up being played by non-actor and real-life mob enforcer Lenny Montana, he was understandably twitchy during shooting. In the scene where Brasi congratulates Vito on the wedding of his daughter, Montana is genuinely jittery, both per his lack of general acting experience and, well, shooting a scene opposite Marlon frickin' Brando. Yet ever one to use a potential problem to his advantage, director Francis Ford Coppola simply worked Montana's anxious demeanour into the story by writing an additional scene showing Brasi nervously rehearsing his speech to Don Corleone beforehand. And like that, Coppola ensured that Montana's amateur performance did not stand out in the slightest. In fact, it only further compounded the regard in which Don Corleone was held by the audience, because if this intense looking dude is scared of him, he must be a real piece of work, alright?